Hello, Legacy Sabers. Marsh here. So today we're going to be talking about variables in Python. What you're going to want to have with you is the foldable that has this information on that you're going to be filling out as you watch. And also you're going to want some kind of writing utensil, of course, to fill in said foldable. So first, we're going to talk about what is a variable and what is that information. Notice this is not on the foldable. I'll let you know when that shows up. So ultimately, one thing that we need to talk about is the idea of a value. So the value of information. It's one piece of information, and we're going to kind of, as we're going through this, we're going to think about that value is on a sticky note. And there are two kinds of values that exist in programming in particular. One of which is a number. The number is consistently made of digits 0 through 9. It has no quotation marks, and it is what we're going to term as the yellow sticky. So every time we see a yellow sticky as we're working, we're going to see yellow, and that's going to tell us that is a number. So keep in mind that if you see a yellow sticky as we're going through this PowerPoint today, that should be corresponding to a number. The other kind of value that we will commonly be working with is called a string. Now, a string can be made up of any characters. The main difference between strings and numbers is that they have to have double quotation marks, and we're going to see that as a red/pink sticky as we're working through our PowerPoint today. So right here, I have a quotation marks high. That's a string. Notice this one, though. That's quotation 1, 2, 3. This is different than this guy right here. So this 123 right here is the actual number 123. It represents 123 objects. This 123 in quotation marks is actually the word 123. It doesn't represent a value. It doesn't have a quantity or a number attached. And I know that's kind of weird. You're like, but it's 123. But the thing is that 123 in quotation marks does not have the quantity, the number behind it. It doesn't have the number of objects corresponding to it. Now, here's where you're going to want to write something down in your notebook or in that foldable. So variables. What is a variable? You've probably encountered a variable in math before. Math with a variable usually had like an X or a Y, and when you solved, you got an answer, right? Well, that answer, no matter how many times you solve that problem, you got the same answer. A variable in programming is kind of similar, but at the same time is kind of different. So a variable in programming, we're going to say the definition is a named memory location that stores information so it can be used later. What you're going to want to think of a variable to be is a named box that contains a value. So right here, I'm going to draw myself a box. And then we're going to name it, let's give it the name of Bob. That's a good name for a variable. Whoop, that was a really terrible B. So what this is my variable. Its name is Bob, and it holds the value of 13. Okay, so what is happening here is that my variables, I've made a variable so I can store a value. Now, here's the cool thing about variables in programming. Bob, the variable, can have a different value at any time that I want it to. So you can almost kind of rechange or change out that sticky or that value so that you can change it as you're working. Now, variables in programs are named very usefully. So we make it so that the names are meaningful. So maybe they're holding a total. We'll name the variable total. Maybe it holds the name of somebody. We'll put the variable's name as name. So in most of our programs, Bob would be a terrible name for a variable because it's not descriptive. It doesn't tell us what that is actually holding. Now, we're going to represent variables in our brain as plastic baggies. So the idea that you can only hold one value, or in our case, one sticky note at a time, your name that you're making can only have no quotes It cannot include spaces, and it must start with a letter. So what I have here are 3 separate variables. I have a variable called zip2, I have a variable called zip, and I have a variable called whoop. Now notice, whoop and zip have values inside. They have sticky notes inside. We have assigned zip and whoop with some values. So zip has the value of 2 inside of it, and whoop has the value of high inside. But zip2 has no value assigned to it yet. It is an empty variable. The variable does not have a value yet. How do you make a brand new variable? Well, in Python, it is quite simple. When to make a new variable, you're just going to write the variable's name beside it. So if I want to make the variable called pow, I just type the word pow. So that way it makes me a brand new baggie and it writes the variable's name on the bag. So theoretically, remember, in programming, all we're doing when we make a new variable is we're making a brand new named box. We're considering in real life that box to look like a bag. Here's some examples of me actually using variables in my programming. So here I have my variable called greeting, and I have assigned it, that's that equal sign there is me saying I'm assigning it, the value hello world. So what that would look like in a traditional sense is a box in memory has been made, and we have named it greeting. So we're going to put the word, let me figure out where my pen is. There it is. So we're going to put the word greeting on it. So we've labeled the box and we've placed the value, the sticky note, hello world inside. Notice it's in quotations, so it is a string. So that would be a red sticky note. And then what we're doing is we're printing greeting. Now, it's not going to print greeting like the word greeting, because do you notice that greeting is not in quotations, just like we did last time we had quotations around it. What this is going to actually do is it's going to print the actual value of greeting. So what it's going to do is it's going to go, oh, I need to print the variable greeting. So it's going to go over to the box. It's going to find the one that's named greeting, and it's going to look inside the value and say, oh, the value of greeting is hello world. So what it will actually print to the console is the words hello world. Okay? That is because the greeting is not in quotation marks. Now, I've also made a my number. So what we're going to do is we're going to make ourselves our named memory box, our baggie, and we're going to call it, we called it my number. Notice there is a capital on that N, and then we've assigned it the value 50. Now, keep in mind, since this is a number, we're going to correlate that sticky to be yellow because of it being a number associated with it. And again, I print my number. Now notice, it's not going to print my number because that's not in quotation marks. It is referring to the variable my number. It's wondering, print, what is the value of my number? Well, I'm going to go over here. My number has a value of 50, so I would print the value of 50. Now, there are a couple of words that you're going to hear me use throughout the year and if you continue in your programming career. So there's the 2 words that we're going to be using is called declaring and initializing. When you declare a variable, that means that you are creating a spot in memory to hold the value. You are declaring that you want to make something. You haven't given it a value, but you want to kind of give it a spot in memory saying, hey, can you like make that baggie? Can you like create that box? But don't put anything in it. I'm planning on using it, but I'm not using it yet. And then initialization is you assigning a value to a variable at the beginning of your program. So you declare and initialize at the same exact time. In Python, when you make a variable, the moment you first create it, you give it an assignment value. So in Python, we will declare and initialize all variables right at the beginning when we start using them. But those 2 words you're going to be hearing quite a bit. We're going to declare and initialize. We're trying to use the big words that you might be hearing while we are continuing in our semester. Now, a variable has three things attached to it. He has a name, so we can refer to it. It has a type, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and it also has a value associated with it. A value is like the sticky notes that we've been talking about. Now, the main thing I want to talk about as well is the assignment operator. Ultimately, the assignment operator to us is the equal sign. Now, be very careful. We're not going to say equals. We're going to try to say the word assign when we see an equal sign. Because unlike math, when you set equal something, it never could change. But in programming, we have the ability to change the value of a variable. So, variables, unfortunately, can only hold one sticky or value at a time. If there's already a sticky note in there or a value inside the variable, we throw it away. So, first thing that's happening is I am making a brand new variable called POW. So, I'm making a brand new bag. I put POW on it so that I have that marked in. And then the next line, line number 1 here, is me assigning POW the value of 3. Now, notice 3 is in yellow sticky note because it is a number. And then my next line, I have POW equals 5, or POW is assigned or gets 5. So since POW has already a value of 3, I have to throw the 3 away and I assign POW the new value of 5. Now here's the problem with this. POW does not remember it had the value of 3. All he remembers is that his value is 5. So once you throw away or replace the value inside of a variable, you can never get back the old value. So that's why when we are using our variables, we're being very careful when we are assigning. But I'm always going to say right here, POW is assigned the value of 3 or POW gets the value of 3. So that way we're changing that idea that that is an equal sign when we are doing our programming. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to run this program. I want you to decide what are the values of these variables at the end. I'm going to pause for a little bit here. Let you do some thinking. Figure it out, to run the program. So ultimately, here is what is going to be happening for our program. We are first going to be making a variable, and it looks like it's called pizza, and it's assigned the value of 3. So what I'm going to do is make a little box here, and I'm going to say, yes, the variable is called pizza, and I'm going to give it a value of 3 inside. Now keep in mind that is a yellow sticky inside. That's why it's yellow right here. Next line, I make a variable called tacos, and it is assigned the value of yep. So I'm going to make another bag here. I'm going to say tacos is his name, and it's assigned the value of yep. Now notice yep has quotation marks. That is because it's a string variable. And then they're saying, well, pizza, which I already have that variable, right? We've already made him. He's now assigned the value of yum. So what I have to now do is I'm going to go in, I'm going to erase that 3 out of pizza, and I need to put the value of yum inside. Okay. Now notice the 3 is gone. Don't even remember that 3 was inside a pizza. The next line, I'm now going to change tacos' value, and it's assigned the best. So let us go in. We're going to erase yep, because that's no longer the value of tacos. And we're going to assign tacos the value the best. So at the end of my program, hopefully you got that pizza has the value of yum and tacos has the value of the best. Now, conventions of variables, and we kind of discussed this a little bit before. When you're making your variable name, it must start with a letter, cannot start with a number, can only contain letters, numbers, and underscores. And also be very careful, they are case sensitive. So that means lowercase h and capital AGE are 2 different variables. Python understands those as 2 different values. So be very, very careful when you are naming. If you capitalize and you try to use it later in your program, got to remember it, okay? I personally make all my variables have a lowercase, all of them, unless I have multiple words inside of my variable, which we'll talk about here in a little bit for my name. Then I will be capitalizing some of the letters inside. And we'll look at that here in a minute. But let's talk about types of variables. There are 4 kinds of variables that are consistently used in programming and in Python. So we have the int, the str, the float, and the bool. Let's first take a look at the int, the str. Well, str is short for string. It is a variable whose type str contains text or a sequence of 0 or more characters, letters, numbers, punctuation, spaces, etc. Those are the red sticky notes that you guys have been so confident with working with in the last couple of minutes here. So some examples of my variable str would be quotations hello world, quotation ABC123. This guy is a very unique str. This is the str or the string that has nothing inside. It's literally a quotation mark, quotation mark. There's nothing. That is the variable of nothing or the value of nothing inside of a string. Make sure also, this is a video, so if you're trying to write stuff down, make sure you're pausing the video so you can get everything down. The next variable type that I want to talk about is the int variable type. Int is short for integer. Now you're probably thinking, hold up. I've heard integer before. You're correct. Integer in math is a variable or a number that does not have a decimal. And that's exactly what we're going to think the same as in our programming sense. So a variable whose type is int contains a number, so the yellow sticky note. It can be positive, it can be negative, it can be 0, but it cannot, and I'm going to really accent that, it cannot have a decimal inside. It only is numbers. So -50 could be an int, 0 could be an int, 5 could be an int, 379 could be an int, but no decimals allowed. Now you're probably thinking, well, Marsh, what if I want decimals? What if I have fractions? I really love fractions. Float is the one we're going to be using. Float is short for floating point number. Basically, it is a number that contains decimals. So we're going to consider a float a number that holds decimals. So -3.2, 0.0, even though that's 0, but it has a decimal point in it, and 4.5652. That would be all float numbers or float data types inside of Python. So very similar to an integer. Another yellow sticky note as well. And then we have this other guy. His name is bool. He is short for Boolean. Ultimately, it can only hold 2 values, either true or false. We are going to be taking a look at bool data types in our second unit of this class. It's used in a lot of decision making in programs when you want to figure out if something's true or false. But keep in mind that a bool data type is only able to hold 2 different values, true or false. Can't put anything else inside of a bool data type. And the last thing I really want to talk about is the idea of camel case. You know how I said that if my variable has more than one word attached to it, sometimes I will be putting more capital letters. Like we said, when we're typing our names of our variables, we cannot use a space. It's not allowed. So you can't name a variable my space number. So if I need to use more than one word to name a variable, I'm going to use what's known as camel case. Computer scientists decided to make this convention so that it's easier to read. It's common practice to begin in lowercase, and then we use camel case for the naming, which means that for each new word, a capital letter is used. So right here, I have some camel case. So I started with a lowercase t, and I spelled out this, and then I capitalized the I is capital C camel, capital C case. Okay, notice that that is quite easier to read without even the spaces. You can kind of see it. And then we have computer science is fun. New word, I get a capital letter because we cannot use our spaces. The non-example, notice how I have this is not camel case. Kind of hard to read compared to this guy. So when I am making a variable, And like I said, maybe we want to name it the coolest variable. I will name it the lowercase t, capital C, coolest, capital V, variable. Oop, that was not very good. That looks like it has a space. Marsh, you can't have a space in the middle there. Let me fix that. There we go. So that would be making the coolest variable, and maybe I'm going to assign it the value of 5. So the coolest variable has been assigned the value of 5. Notice every time I wanted to put a new word for my name of my variable, I did capital letters. That is so it's easier for you to read as you are reading, or if you're looking at someone else's code, you really hope that someone does camel case for their variables as well.